Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, lovely Check Your Thread heads. How are you doing? I'm doing really well. It's the school half-term holidays, so the mornings haven't been too early, and it's been sunny. My in-laws have been down to visit this week, so we've been out and about doing fun things. And I went up to London this week to record my first one-to-one face-to-face conversation for the podcast outside my own home. I had a bit of a nostalgia trip whilst I was up there because I got off at Bethnal Green, where I used to work for fast fashion clothing manufacturers. It was a pretty wild experience, actually, having not been there for 15 years and then thinking about how much my life has changed since then. Anyway, I had an awesome conversation that will be coming out at some point. Plus, I have jam-packed the rest of this month with heaps of scheduled recordings for the podcast. So much awesomeness is coming your way. So if you haven't already, please subscribe or favourite or like or whatever you need to do for Check Your Thread in your preferred podcast app to make sure that you don't miss future episodes. So Me Made May is behind us for another year, but I just wanted to remind those who participated in the challenge this year that the free Me Made May and Beyond worksheet is available to help you capture your experience and the lessons you learnt. You just need to sign up to the Check Your Thread newsletter before the end of June, and the download link will be pinged straight into your inbox. To sign up to the newsletter, just head to checkyourthread.com and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. Well, I hope that your making has been going well. I haven't had as much opportunity to sew this week as I would have liked, but I did manage to finish off my second bikini. This one is made using a sample of leopard print swimwear fabric that has been in my stash for over a decade. I've used the bottoms pattern from the Vanazza two-piece by Friday Pattern Company and the top pattern from the Sandpiper swimsuit by Helen's Closet. This was my second version of both these patterns. My first version of the Sandpiper top was too small, and my first version of the Vanazza bottoms was great, but I decided I'd prefer elastic inserted into the waistband. And because of those lessons, my leopard print version has come out so well, and I love it. Woohoo! So, a sustainability update. You've probably heard me mention before that I always try and get my kids' school uniforms second-hand where possible. And that when I talk about it, that this fact is sometimes met with confused looks at the school gate. I have long been frustrated that my kids' school doesn't have any kind of school uniform swap or second-hand sale like my daughter's previous school did. So recently I decided to step up and volunteer myself to collect unwanted items of school clothes and organise a second-hand sale at the forthcoming summer fair. I have no idea how successful it'll be. It's only a small school, so I'm not sure how much unwanted uniform is floating around to people's homes, but I'm hoping that it'll keep at least some items out of landfill for longer. And I'm also hoping that it will begin to normalise second-hand clothes for some people who perhaps don't normally consider it as an option. I'll update you about how it goes. This week has been a truly awesome one for the Check Your Thread Patreon. We have reached over 100 amazing patrons and had 5 new sign-ups this week at time of recording. Massive thanks to Janine, Carla, Judith, Stephanie and Kim for setting up their monthly support to keep the podcast going. If you enjoy this podcast and are in a position to make small monthly contributions, please consider signing up. It takes less than a minute to do so and can be for any amount that you wish. The Patreon link can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. Right, let's get into today's episode. This conversation is with artist, maker and scavenger Noah Hirsch. He's known as young_curmudgeon on Instagram, where you can follow what cool and interesting stuff he's been up to lately. Previous guest Shams Eldin Rogers cited him as an inspiration, so I knew I had to find out more. And it turns out Noah is a super interesting and thoughtful person who is involved in all sorts of sustainability and reclamation related activities, both in his day job and in his spare time. We talked about all sorts, including dumpster diving, which I'm fascinated by, and the Sunnyland Free Pantry that Noah stocks with mended clothes for members of his community in need of warm clothes. Shortly after we recorded this conversation, Noah messaged me to say that the mending technique he was trying to describe towards the end of the episode is basically reverse applique, so no need to message either of us about that. The show notes this week include links to all the fascinating organisations Noah mentioned and some pictures to help you put a visual to the things we spoke about. Okay, enjoy! Well, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me for Check Your Thread. I'm very excited.
Thank you for having me.
Would you mind starting by introducing yourself and let us know who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
Yeah, my name is Noah Hirsch. I live in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest, and I am a maker, artist, and scavenger. And there are elements of that both in my day job and my personal work.
Awesome. So what is your day job then?
I work at a nonprofit that does textile diversion, so we just try and keep as much fabric and clothing out of the landfill as possible, which is also what I do in my own work.
Amazing. So what came first then, like your kind of own passion for it, and then you happened to find a role for that, or was it kind of the other way around?
No, it was kind of work that I've been doing for years and years, and this organization just happened to exist where I live, and I began there as a volunteer, and now it's my job.
That's amazing. So what's your day-to-day there then?
Yeah, we accept donations of clothing and craft materials, and it exists kind of as a thrift store where things are mostly sold by the pound. And so people who are working on sewing projects can come in and buy yardage or scraps or notion. And they're all secondhand, so you don't have to go and buy new things.
So is that where you get a lot of your own materials and the things that you use in your own personal work as well?
I do get a fair amount of stuff there, but a lot of the stuff I use is found materials. As I said, I'm a scavenger, so a lot of the things I find are literal garbage. I do a lot of dumpster diving for materials and stuff
Okay,
like that.
I really want to talk about that. Let's just go for that as well. Okay, so when I think of dumpster diving, I think of it as in people and they're going to find food, but it sounds like you're looking for textiles as well, or instead of.
Yeah, so there is a lot of dumpster diving that is at grocery stores and stuff, and finding food that is perfectly good that's thrown out because it's, a bruised apple or a dented can or whatever.
Yeah.
But most of the dumpster diving that I do is at apartment buildings and stuff like that, where it's people who are moving out. I live in a place with a university, so a lot of the people are kind of constantly moving in and out. And when people move out, they just throw out a ton of stuff. So throughout the year, kind of at the end of every single month, I can walk around, in alleyways and dumpsters behind apartment buildings and find people are throwing out the contents of their entire kitchen or clothes or whatever.
Oh, that's so exciting. I follow quite a few like dumpster diving kind of accounts on Instagram, but I've never been brave enough to do it myself, especially when you see they've got the hauls of all that food, I'm just like, oh, it's amazing. So like the first couple of times you did it, were you a bit like, oh, okay, I don't know how this works? Or did you just get me at it?
I've sort of slowly gotten into it over a very long time. I've always sort of liked finding treasure. Even as a kid, I liked going to thrift stores and yard sales and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if there was a free pile on the sidewalk, I'd, look through it and see if there's anything cool to make art with or cool looking things. And then I think the way I started dumpster diving was I read online about people who would dumpster dive at Halloween stores, because these massive stores exist. And then as soon as Halloween's over, they close up completely.
Oh, really? They're super seasonal. Oh.
Yeah. And they're massive store spaces. So, yeah, I started dumpster diving at those Halloween stores right after Halloween. And unfortunately, a lot of their stores have policies where they have to destroy the merchandise before they throw it out
to
prevent people from pulling it out.
Yeah.
So that is kind of a interesting exercise in rescue, because things are intentionally destroyed. And of course, the costumes and stuff are made for one use. So it's not like there's a lot to be found there. But that's kind of my introduction, was just seeing these things that were perfectly usable were going in the trash. And then I met some artists in Seattle who were dumpster diving for food, and they taught me the different grocery stores and bakeries and stuff, and where you could go to get day-old bread that had gotten thrown out and stuff like that.
So it's kind of like a community that kind of shares their tips.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting to meet people who also do it, and it is kind of a exchanging of info and this sort of underground community, I guess. And I sometimes run into other dumpster divers when I'm just out and about. And there was one time I ran into a couple people while I was dumpster diving, and we just stood around and we had a little like impromptu trading circle, which was really fun.
Oh, cool. I was wondering, like, are you kind of, is that cool? You'd be like, hey, get off my turf, or?
No, I don't experience it that way. I like meeting
That's
other
cool.
people, and normally people are just excited to meet other folks who are doing it.
Yeah, completely. I can really imagine. That was amazing. But let's go back a sec. So I would love to know how you started sewing and mending.
I've always liked making and fixing things and making art. And I grew up during the resurgence of what I guess I would call the maker movement, where
Right.
I didn't have a shop class or even home ec available to me. My mom taught me to sew at a pretty young
Cool.
age, which I'm forever grateful for. She taught me kind of basic mending and how to use her machine, which at that point was already decades old, and walked me
Amazing.
through making a vest. And so those basic skills I learned from her and used to mend my own stuff. But I've always liked making things, and I was consuming all this media, these magazines and books and YouTube videos, kind of at the beginning of where there was this idea of making as like a mindset where it was like, why would you buy anything? Why wouldn't you DIY something? Why wouldn't you fix something if you could? And so that kind of became my mindset, where it was just like, yeah, why wouldn't I fix anything I could? Why wouldn't I
So
make
does it
something?
kind of become like almost like a challenge?
It is. And it's interesting because it's sometimes also hard to kind of get out of that mindset now because I've been in it so long. It can be hard sometimes for my mind to kind of just get over that and say, like, this isn't practical. And when talking to other people and kind of trying to preach repair and visible mending and stuff, that sometimes can be a reminder where I know that I am overzealous about it and have to keep in mind that
Right.
things that I know are even impractical for myself are just not thinkable for the average person. But it's something that I like to talk about because it's not something that most people think about a lot. Where sometimes if someone is talking about a problem, oh, this thing is broken, or I need to get a new thing of this, and I just say, like, hey, you could repair that. They just go, oh, yeah, of course I could repair that. And it's just something that like we're not used to thinking about. And so I like to talk about it with people because it's that kind of like, oh, duh moment that I really like to kind of witness.
Yeah, completely. I so agree. I completely relate to everything you're saying. For example, for me, like if I can get something secondhand, obviously that's resources that already exist in the world. But for example, like my kids go to a school where they have a uniform that has a special logo. If I can't get it secondhand, I have to buy it new. I hate it so much. Whereas like all the other parents are like, what are you talking about? Just go to the shop. I'm like, "Argh!" And they're like, I don't know what your problem is. Yeah, also it's hard, isn't it? Because you think I need to talk about this because that's how we normalize repair and mending and stuff. But it is hard sometimes, isn't it, to think, oh, am I talking a bit too much about this? But how do you find that balance, or have you? It's not something that concerns you.
It's hard. I think it's really about just recognizing that different people have different values and different abilities and different resources and kind of trying to meet them wherever they are, where it's just like not everyone's going to be mending things indefinitely like I do, but someone can replace a button. Or even if someone just doesn't go out and buy a new thing, that's something. And I think that in sort of the sustainability, zero waste world, there's a lot of problems in messaging where it is kind of an all or nothing thing. And so I really like just
Yes, so true.
saying whatever you can do. And on Clothes Horse podcast, Amanda likes to say progress, not perfection. And that's a phrase that I've
Nice. Yeah,
adopted and really like because I think it's a really great place to start.
yeah, I love that. So, what's your wardrobe situation like now? Then, what's your oldest garment?
Oldest garment currently in use, I'd say, is this flannel shirt that I'm wearing right now.
Which is art. It looks amazing.
Thank you. It's an ongoing project, I think, of 6 or 7 years by now. I do have some clothes that I've had for longer, but that are not in regular wear anymore. I have a pair of pants that I've had since high school that sort of was when I first committed to kind of the patches on top of patches type of mending.
Right.
Keep on going. And so I have these pants from high school that all of the patches are backed in duct tape and sewed on in dental floss. So they're just
Oh,
extremely rugged, and those patches just don't wear out. Yeah, I
interesting.
hadn't quite gotten.
What inspired you to do that? I never would have thought to do that.
Well, in high school, I hung out with a lot of punk kids, and that was just part of it, was just having clothes that were patched up and keeping them together. And it wasn't really about aesthetics. There was an aesthetic behind it, but it wasn't exactly invisible mending or even presentability. It was just kind of keeping stuff together. And so those pants
Yeah.
are not really something that I would wear anymore because they don't look particularly good, but they are still wearable if I wanted them to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm really interested in what you're saying about, obviously you come from kind of art background also. So where do you find I guess there's some sort of overlap between your kind of art practices and then the kind of practicality of keeping garments in use. Is that something you think about, that kind of way that overlaps? Is there always an element of both in every piece you attempt?
It definitely is, and reuse is part of both the aesthetic and the process. Where I
Mm.
work so much with found materials that finding the materials is kind of part of the process, where I repair anything I can. So, not just textiles, but whatever I have that's broken, I try and fix. And instead of going to a hardware store, I go and walk around, and I walk around alleys and check dumpsters. And if I need a bit of wood, I'll see what I can find, or a little bit of metal for something, and just kind of walk around until I find what I need. And so it's part of the process, which also kind of informs the aesthetics because I'm working with whatever I can find. So it's kind of
Sure.
a weird relationship where it's both the aesthetics are the making of the art and the making of the art is the aesthetics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. I love it. I love how bold you are as well. You're not like, okay, I only work with fabric. You're like, okay, wood, okay, wire, dental floss. Like, it doesn't sound like you give yourself any barriers when you keep a really open mind when you're looking around.
Yeah, definitely. I like to work with whatever I can find, and if I'm working that way, I can't always be picky. So it is just I need something made of wood right now, and maybe that's a branch off the sidewalk, or maybe that's a piece of a bookshelf, or whatever I can find, and that really is helpful in thinking about repairing because it adds so much sort of adaptability. Where if I have a friend who comes to me and asks, "How can I repair this?" I'm usually able to just kind of list off half a dozen different options, and they just say, like, how did you have all of those just off the top of your head? And it's just like, well, I work with whatever I have, so I have to kind of have all those different ideas.
Yeah.
Not all of them
So
will
that's
work.
through your experience of having tried all those things and some are working better than others.
Yeah, and just kind of having an idea of what might work and that they might not always work too, which is always interesting when giving those recommendations to people because not everyone has the time or ability or really enjoys the process of that experimentation. They just want things to be fixed.
Yeah. Do you ever take on commissions for mending?
I have taken on some commissions for mending. I started a project called Mending as Mutual Aid a little while
Oh,
ago.
tell me about that.
Yeah. So the inspiration for that came out of a group in Portland called Mending Block that around the time that there were all of the protests for racial justice around the states in Portland, Oregon, a lot of groups formed to provide different services for people separate from any existing organizations, where it was just people offering whatever services they had to people. So you could go to one group that had a printer and they'd print out your resume for a job interview.
Oh,
Another
amazing.
group that would fix your car if you needed repairs for your car. A group that was opticians were making glasses for people. And there was a group called Mending Block, and they would just show up to events and mend people's clothes. And I thought that that was so cool. I really wanted to do something like that and kind of had it in the back of my mind for a long time. And when I finally got it going, which was as a part of a final project for the BA I was working in college
Yeah.
about sustainable textiles, basically.
Oh, cool.
So one part of that was mending commissions on a sliding scale cost to try and keep it accessible to
Nice.
people. People could name their price by the hour. And then part of it was donated to other organizations doing work in my community. And then the other part of it was finding and collecting clothes that needed mending to be dropped off at the Sunnyland Free Pantry, which is just a pantry in an alleyway. And
Yeah.
so anyone can access it at any time. It's full of food and toiletries and clothing, and people just take what they need. And if you have things extra, you drop it off.
Good. I'm so glad you brought that up because I was so desperate to talk about that because this is something that we don't really have in the UK. Your pantry's got its own Instagram account. Is that right?
Yeah, it does. And it's really cool to see because you get a tangible view of how useful it is to people. Where if I drop
Sure.
off clothes and then the pantry's Instagram account posts a photo of it the next day and none of the clothes are there, I know that all of those clothes went to somebody who needs them. And so it's
That's
just like
amazing.
proof of what's needed and the results of that work, because there's also times
Yeah.
where I've dropped off clothes there, and as I'm just folding things up and sticking them in the pantry, someone comes up and takes one of the sweaters while I'm still there.
That must feel so good. That must be really, really
It,
heartwarming. But
it really is, yeah.
so how do you source the items that you then fix up and put in the pantry?
Originally, I was putting the call out over social media, and I just said if anyone has warm clothes, because there is a need for warm clothes specifically, warm clothes that need mending or a little repair, or even if you're just not using them, you can hand them off to me and I will repair them and I'll bring them to the pantry. And that didn't get that much attention. I had a handful of people give me stuff, including somebody gave me a big bag of socks. And so I spent a long time darning socks for the pantry.
Oh no, that's my worst.
I got pretty good at it.
I bet you did.
Yeah. And so that was the original plan, but I wasn't getting that much stuff. And then in the course of my normal dumpster diving, because whenever I'm walking around, I'm always kind of keeping an eye out, I just kept finding clothes. And more often than not, they were clothes that didn't need any repairs at all, that were perfectly
Really?
wearable as
Wow.
is. And sometimes they were left in free boxes on the sidewalk, which is great. Somebody knew that somebody would want it.
Mhm.
But more often than not, they were just right in the dumpster. And so I would pull out these clothes and wash them and do men's if needed, although often that was not needed, and
Wow.
bring them to the pantry. And these were clothes that were perfectly wearable that would have gone to
Yeah.
the landfill if I wasn't poking through the dumpster.
Oh, it's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? Thinking if you weren't there, that would have gone to the landfill. And thinking you can't be everywhere. There must be loads of stuff going to the. Oh, I don't want to think about it.
Absolutely.
As they say, you're presented with like you're on the sidewalk and there's a box of like free stuff. So, what particular items do you tend to gravitate towards in terms of what you think the pantry would need?
Well, since we are in a pretty cold area, it's mostly just anything warm,
Right.
anything you can layer with. But I kind of tend to have a problem where if anything's usable, I grab it and I think I know where this can go. And
Yeah.
then I end up with a big bag I'm holding onto for someone or something. But and like you said, you can't rescue everything, which is kind of
Yeah.
hard because I like to say that dumpster diving is kind of a mix of emotions between like the joy of finding something and excitement of finding treasure, and then just kind of like the sadness of anger that it was in the trash.
Yeah.
Just this was here, and if I hadn't seen it, it would end up in the landfill.
Yeah.
And I find so much stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you find it's quite seasonal? Like, is there in the summer, in the warmer months, you're then finding other things?
It is because of the local university that at the
Mm.
end of the quarter, when all the students move out of the dorms, that's a massive amount of stuff is thrown out. And so I go to the university and check the dumpsters behind the dorms. And to their credit, the university has done what they can to try and divert that waste. They have a few different programs where they're trying to collect things, but people
Hmm.
still do throw out stuff, a lot of clothes, a lot of food and stationery and stuff like that, because
Yeah.
it's people who are living somewhere temporarily. And if they're moving back home across the country or wherever,
Sure.
they're not going to be taking, all the cans of soup or whatever. And if they
Yeah.
don't have a better place to bring it, then they just think to throw it out.
Yeah, yeah. So, in terms of your kind of creativity as well, like, are there any kind of creative disciplines or skills or anything that you would like to try that you haven't had a go at yet? It sounds like you've had a go at everything so far.
Yeah, I've dabbled in a lot of things, and some things I like better, some things I am better at. There's some things that I just won't do. I know
Right.
that they're not worth it, and I
Like
know
what?
that I don't have the skills. I have done a lot of electronics repair and
Have you?
a little bit, but some of it I just know I can't do. And knowing that I can't fix something is a bad feeling as somebody who tries to fix as many things as I
Yeah.
can, but can't do everything. And if that is the case, I try to salvage things out of whatever I'm using to try and make sure it's not just completely going to the trash. But especially with electronics and home goods and stuff, none of it was made to be repaired. In a lot of cases, it was made specifically not to be repaired. And so that can be hard. If there's nothing I can do because I wasn't meant to be repairing it, then that's it.
Yeah, that's so frustrating, isn't it? So do you ever make garments, for example, from scratch?
It's not something I've done much of. I have problems with sort of the precision of garment making and following patterns.
Yeah.
It's something I would love to get better at. And whenever I sew, I kind of try and improve those skills by making sure I'm stopping and thinking through what I'm doing, kind of measure twice, cut once, instead of like, don't measure at all and hope it works out.
Yeah.
I do a lot of mending and kind of upcycling and decoration more than
Yeah.
much like
Sure.
garments from scratch.
Like, I don't think that people necessarily should make things from scratch. I mean, I guess it must be, I'm kind of projecting here, but I guess when you're witnessing the discarding of so many things, it must be almost hard to kind of maybe justify, or like, where is the motivation for making something from scratch, possibly, when you're saying there's so much out there already that needs redistribution. Like, there's something that, I mean, I'm obviously a passionate sewer, but like, it's something that I struggle with sometimes, like, no one needs me to make more stuff. And I think Louisa Owen Sonstrom, the woman that makes things using hand sewing techniques, she said the same. It's like, no one needs her to make any more things, but it's a hard balance to find. Do you know what I mean?
It definitely is. And I feel that as somebody who loves making for the sake of making, where it is just the thing I'm making, if I'm making it for fun or to learn a new technique, it doesn't need to exist. And I make a lot of things that are kind of silly or artsy or impractical just because I think that it's fun. And so that is something I think a lot about, where it's just, yeah, this thing that I'm making will be in the world forever. And even if I enjoy making it and I like sharing the photos and stuff, it doesn't necessarily need to exist. And I think I offset that a little bit by working with literally trash. Almost everything I
Yeah,
work with
massively.
is
Yeah.
yeah, but it definitely is something I think about a lot. And it's a discussion that I think needs to happen a lot more kind of in the DIY community, where it's just, we love making, but are we basically emulating fast fashion if we're just always
Yes.
making?
So true. Yeah. I feel like that's a conversation people are starting to have more. Do you think so?
I do, yeah. I think it's good. And I like the idea of being more thoughtful about what we're making, and just for reasons other than I like making it. But it's hard because, we like making
Yeah.
things. So we want to
Maker's
make
gonna make.
things. Exactly. Yeah. It's just, does this thing need to exist? Could it serve another purpose? Is it useful to someone, even if it's not useful to me?
Yeah. So that leads me very well on to my next question. So, what tips could you give to listeners who would like to sew more sustainably or take on a more sustainable mindset in their lifestyle more generally?
Well, I think the first thing is just buy less stuff. This conversation's happening more, which I really like, but I feel like the mainstream kind of view of sustainable fashion, as well as sort of zero waste consumption, is still very much based on consumption.
So true.
And
Yeah.
so the message we're getting from our targeted Instagram ads is that sustainable fashion looks like flowy tunics made of hemp.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's exactly what's in your closet already. And so I think just knowing what's in your closet already, taking care of those clothes, wearing them, the normalizing outfit repeating is something I totally
Yeah.
agree with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just that idea of you don't need to buy more things, and that the most sustainable thing is never going to be buying a new thing, even if it's made with recycled plastic water bottles or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So that still takes loads of energy and creates loads
Exactly.
of waste. So, who do you look to for inspiration, or who inspires you?
Yeah. My Mending is Mutual Aid project came from Mending Block in Portland, Oregon. And they've done a lot of, in addition to mending events, they've done things where they'll take people's old clothes and sew them into masks to keep people safe at protests. Yeah. Just ideas of taking things that already exist and making them useful again. Lately, my mending inspiration has been following accounts that rescue really old workwear. So people go into people's barns and they find overalls and, things that are 100 years old. And just looking at those photos has taught me more about mending, where I see these are clothes that were mended 100 years ago that are still intact. So I should be doing that too.
That's very inspiring. What kind of technique are they using?
There's just a style of patching where it's like the new fabric goes underneath the hole and then you do kind of like a pin tuck over the hole. It's really hard to describe over audio, but and I saw all those photos. I thought it looked cool, and also knowing that they still exist. And so that's something that I've started to use in my own mending.
So cool.
And I really like the look of it.
Maybe if you wouldn't mind at some point, you could send me a couple of images that I could pop in the show notes. I'm sure other people would love to see that. I would love to see that. Thank you so much for this. This has been really interesting. So thank you so much for your time, Noah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!